When the lawyer read my grandparents' will, my name wasn't there. Not once. Not even as a footnote. Everyone else in that room, my brother Ethan, my cousin Sophie, even my mother, had something left to them. A house. A ring. A piece of the Reynolds legacy. But me. It was like I'd never existed. I remember how my grandmother, Margaret, looked at me that day. Calm, polished, almost pleased. She didn't have to say a word, her silence said it all. You don't belong here. The room was so quiet I could hear the ticking of Walter's gold pocket watch, the one he used to time everything, including other people's worth. My mother sat frozen, eyes down, lips trembling. She didn't defend me. No one did. For 28 years, I had believed I was part of a proud family. A family that stood for respect, unity, and tradition. But in that single moment, I understood the truth. Those values only applied to those they favored. As I walked out of that room, I whispered to myself, if they've erased me, they've erased the wrong person. And that's when I decided some names can't be deleted. Not when they carry the truth. Growing up in the Reynolds family felt like living inside a picture-perfect painting, glossy, beautiful, and suffocatingly fake. Every Sunday dinner was a performance. The silverware sparkled, the laughter was rehearsed, and my grandmother Margaret presided over it all like a queen guarding her throne. She had rules for everything, how we spoke, how we dressed, even how loudly we laughed. Dignity, she always said, is what separates us from ordinary people. And somehow, my brother Ethan embodied that dignity perfectly. He was charming, confident, and always seemed to say what my grandparents wanted to hear. I still remember one night, when Grandpa Walter raised a toast to him for closing his first business deal. The whole table clapped. I smiled too, pretending not to notice that my own small win, a scholarship to graduate school, had gone completely unmentioned. Ethan makes us proud, Margaret said that night, patting his hand with pride. Then she glanced at me and added, and Emma, you've always had a kind heart. That's nice too. Her words were sweet on the surface, but underneath them was the sting of dismissal. I laughed it off, but inside, I shrank a little smaller. My mother, Claire, was the peacemaker, gentle, nervous, forever walking on eggshells around her parents. Don't take it personally, she'd whisper after dinner. You know how they are. But she never dared to speak up. She'd been raised to obey, not to question. Despite everything, I tried to fit in. I attended every family gathering, volunteered at their charity events, cooked meals for holidays, even learned my grandmother's favorite recipes. I thought if I could just prove my loyalty, maybe she'd finally see me. But the favoritism grew harder to ignore. When Ethan crashed his car, Grandpa bought him a new one within a week. When I asked for a small loan to finish my research project, he told me, you should learn to stand on your own 2 feet. At family reunions, they'd show off Ethan's awards, his photographs, his life, and I'd be the one taking the pictures. Everyone saw me as the quiet, dependable one. The background. The shadow. Still, I told myself it was fine. Families aren't perfect. Maybe love just looks different when pride gets in the way. Then one afternoon, while helping my grandmother organize old family albums, I found something that made my hands freeze, a photo tucked behind a page. A young woman holding a baby, standing outside the Reynolds estate. Her face looked strangely familiar. Who's this? I asked. Margaret's expression changed instantly. She snatched the photo from my hand. No one, she said sharply. Some distant relative. Forget you saw that. But I couldn't forget. Because that woman's eyes, they looked exactly like mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. For the first time, I wondered if my family's silence wasn't just favoritism, maybe it was hiding something. Something that explained why I never really belonged. And deep down, I knew that photograph wasn't the end of my questions. It was the beginning. It started the day Grandpa's health began to fail. Hospitals became our second home, and the whispers about the will began circling like vultures before anyone had even said goodbye. Ethan was constantly by their side, or so it seemed. He made sure everyone saw him helping, holding doors, bringing flowers. But behind closed doors, it was me who changed my grandfather's sheets, managed his medications, and sat through the long nights when he couldn't breathe without trembling. "Emma, you've always been good with the small things," Grandma told me once. "But big responsibilities, they're for people who can handle pressure." She said it with that sugar-coated tone, smiling like she'd just given me a compliment. I smiled back, swallowing the ache. After Grandpa passed, the tension in the house turned electric. Everyone was grieving, or pretending to, but there was something colder underneath it all: greed. At the funeral, Ethan stood beside Grandma like her heir apparent, shaking hands, comforting guests. My mother tried to include me in conversations, but every time I spoke, Grandma redirected the focus. When I mentioned Grandpa's favorite poem during the eulogy planning, she interrupted. "Oh no, Ethan should do the reading. He has a better voice for public speaking." And just like that, my memories were dismissed, my voice silenced again. Weeks later, we gathered for the reading of the will in the old family study, that room filled with dust, books, and ghosts of expectations. The lawyer, Mr. Henson, adjusted his glasses and began reading. It all sounded predictable: properties, investments, family heirlooms, until he got to the part about inheritance. To my beloved grandson, Ethan Reynolds, who carries forward the family legacy, the Reynolds estate and all its holdings. Then came a long pause. I waited for my name. To my granddaughter, Emma Reynolds, he hesitated, glancing up at me, then back to the paper. A trust fund of $10,000, in acknowledgement of her kind spirit. Kind spirit. That was all I got. $10,000 and a pat on the head. The room went silent, then filled with polite murmurs. Ethan smirked, a quick, smug expression he tried to hide behind his hand. I felt heat rising in my chest. My throat burned. "Kind spirit?" I said, my voice shaking. "I was the one who took care of him when you all disappeared." Grandma's eyes turned to steel. "Watch your tone, Emma. This isn't the time for drama." I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. "No, Grandma, this is exactly the time. You can preach dignity all you want, but what you've done here isn't about legacy, it's about control." Ethan laughed softly. "You always take things so personally." Something in me snapped. "Because I am the one who's been treated like a stranger in her own family." The lawyer awkwardly cleared his throat, trying to calm the room. But the damage was done. The truth had leaked into the air like poison. Grandma's expression hardened. "Your grandfather made his decision, Emma. You should learn to accept it with grace." "Grace?" I whispered. "You mean silence?" No one responded. Only the ticking of the clock filled the room. As I walked out, I caught a glimpse of that old family portrait hanging on the wall, all of us smiling, pretending. And I realized, for the first time, how easy it was to erase someone from a picture. That day, something in me changed. The girl who wanted their love died in that room. And what replaced her was someone they should have never underestimated. After the will was read, I thought maybe the humiliation would fade with time, that Grandma and Ethan would at least pretend to respect me in public. I was wrong. Their quiet rejection turned louder with every passing week, like a slow, deliberate punishment. At first, it was subtle. I'd walk into a family gathering and conversations would pause for a second too long. My seat at the dinner table, once beside Grandma, was now mysteriously moved to the far end, near the kitchen door. One night, during a family dinner, Grandma raised her glass for a toast. "To Ethan," she said proudly, "for stepping up as the head of our family. He's shown such maturity and leadership." Everyone clapped. I joined in weakly, forcing a smile. When she looked at me, she added with a smirk, "And Emma, well, thank you for always helping with the dishes." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to slice through me. I laughed too, pretending not to care. But inside, something was cracking, slow, silent, dangerous. They started excluding me from decisions, even small ones. When they hosted charity dinners, I was told, "It's more of a formal event, maybe next time." When they took family photos for the newspaper, they said, "It's just immediate family, Emma." Once, during a family brunch at the country club, I overheard Ethan bragging to one of his friends. "She's always been the quiet one," he said, chuckling. "Sweet, but not the kind of person you trust with real responsibility." His friend laughed. You mean the one your grandparents kind of forgot in the will? They both laughed harder. I froze behind the marble pillar, gripping my glass so tight it almost shattered. Later that day, Grandma pulled me aside. Emma, you shouldn't eavesdrop. It makes you look desperate. Her words hit me harder than she knew. Desperate. That's how they saw me, the forgotten granddaughter still trying to matter. But I wasn't desperate anymore. I was angry. Quietly, dangerously angry. The final blow came at Grandma's 80th birthday celebration, the biggest family event of the year. The entire Reynolds clan was there, along with reporters and photographers from the local paper. Ethan took charge of everything, the speeches, the decorations, the guest list. I offered to help with the catering, and Grandma said, just stay out of the way, dear. You'll only complicate things. When the night came, I watched from the corner as Ethan stood beside Grandma on the stage, giving a speech about family unity and carrying the Reynolds legacy with pride. My name wasn't mentioned once. After the applause, the family gathered for the traditional group photo. I tried to step forward, but Grandma turned slightly and whispered, "Oh, Emma, maybe sit this one out, we're doing just the core family." I froze there, in front of everyone. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. Some pitying, some amused. Ethan smirked. "Come on, Emma. Don't make it awkward." I could feel the heat in my face, the sting in my chest. I turned away before they could see my tears. That night, I sat in my car outside the mansion, staring at the glowing windows. Their laughter drifted out, muffled by the glass. I whispered to myself, you erased me from your will, from your pictures, from your family. But soon, you'll remember my name again. As I started the engine, the reflection of the mansion flickered in the rearview mirror, bright, cold, and hollow. And that was the night I decided, they were going to regret underestimating me. Something was about to change, forever. I thought I'd already felt the worst of it, the laughter, the dismissive looks, the cruel jokes whispered behind my back. But nothing compared to the night they made sure the entire town knew I didn't belong. It was the annual Reynolds Foundation Gala, a tradition my grandparents started decades ago. I had attended every year since I was a child, wearing dresses Grandma had picked, smiling for photos beside her. But this year was different. This year, my invitation never came. I convinced myself it was a mistake, maybe a lost email or a mix-up. So, on the evening of the gala, I called Grandma. "Hi, Grandma," I said softly. "I just wanted to check. The event starts at 7, right?" Her silence stretched for too long. Then she said, almost too casually, "Oh, Emma, dear. I thought you knew the seating is very limited this year. It's a smaller event, more business-oriented. You wouldn't really fit in with the crowd." I blinked, frozen. Wouldn't fit in? Ethan's voice came faintly in the background. "Just tell her the truth, Grandma." My heart began to race. "What truth?" I asked. Grandma sighed. "Emma, people talk. It's not appropriate for you to be at events representing the family when you're no longer part of the official estate." It felt like the ground opened beneath me. "Official estate?" I repeated. Ethan took the phone. "Look, Emma. The board has made it clear. Everything tied to the Reynolds name, the trust, the foundation, the brand, it's under my direction now. You're not on any of it. You're not part of the family business anymore." I stood there in my small apartment, surrounded by silence, clutching the phone as their laughter echoed faintly before the line went dead. I stared at the wall for a long time before tears finally came, quiet, exhausted sobs that shook every part of me. I had spent years caring for them, defending them, forgiving them. And now, they had erased me completely. But the worst came the next day. I opened social media and saw the headline. Ethan Reynolds honors family legacy as sole heir to the Reynolds Foundation. There was a photo, Grandma, beaming beside Ethan, holding a plaque that read Reynolds Legacy Award. The caption underneath said, "The Reynolds Foundation celebrates its future under the next generation led by grandson Ethan Reynolds." No mention of me. Not even a name. Not even a memory. I scrolled through the photos, family members smiling, laughing, clinking glasses. My old friends, my cousins, everyone I'd grown up with. No one had even asked where I was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing Grandma's voice, "It's not appropriate for you to represent the family." That sentence broke something in me. But it also lit something else, a spark I didn't know I still had. The next morning, I drove out to the old family mansion. It was empty, locked, and cold. I stood outside the iron gates, staring at the Reynolds crest carved into the stone. The same crest I used to trace with my fingers as a little girl, dreaming of belonging. Now, I looked at it with different eyes. As I turned to leave, a car pulled up Ethan's. He rolled down the window, his smirk as polished as ever. "Emma," he said mockingly, "you shouldn't be here. You're trespassing now." I met his gaze. "You really think you've won, don't you?" He chuckled. "This isn't a competition. It's just reality. Some of us are born for it. Some aren't." I took a slow breath. "You might own the house, Ethan. But I know the cracks in its walls, the ones you pretend aren't there." For the first time, he looked uncertain. Only for a second, but I saw it. That flash of fear. That insecurity he tried so hard to hide. I turned and walked away before he could say another word. My hands were shaking, but my heart felt still, dangerously still. In that silence, I realized something. I had spent my whole life begging for a place at their table, trying to prove I was worthy of their name. But now, I didn't need it. Because I wasn't going to beg anymore. I was going to expose them. Every secret. Every lie. Every betrayal they'd buried under that polished family name, I was going to bring it to light. That night, I opened my old notebooks filled with Grandpa's letters, financial records, and hidden notes I'd saved during his illness. There were things he'd told me, things he never told anyone else. And I realized the truth they built their empire on wasn't theirs to claim. It was mine. I wiped my tears, picked up a pen, and whispered to myself. They wanted me erased. Instead, I'll become the reason their name falls apart. That was the moment Emma Reynolds died and the woman who would destroy the Reynolds legacy was born. For 2 nights after I left the mansion, I barely slept. Grief had been replaced by a cold, steady hunger, not for money, but for truth. I realized the only thing powerful enough to heal what they'd done was to pull every secret into the light and let the world see what they had built on lies. I started small. I went back through every scrap I'd kept from Grandpa's last months, his letters, the notebooks I'd copied by flashlight during those long nights, the petty receipts hidden in drawers. There were notes he never meant to be found, phone numbers jotted in margins, a draft of an alternate will with different names. Each page felt like a small, vital piece of a puzzle I'd been too afraid to assemble before. Next, I called Sophie. She's young, quick, and she still believes in doing the right thing. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't gasp, she asked how fast we could move. "We have to be careful," she said. "They'll try to shut us down." Her calm steadied me. I found myself whispering back, "Then we won't give them a chance." Helen, the old housekeeper, became my heart of courage. She'd kept receipts and letters for decades because she couldn't throw away what proved someone else's truth. When I brought the documents to her, she wept and then handed me a folder marked confidential, Walter's old bank slips, an envelope of letters from a woman whose name I'd never heard aloud in our dining room. Helen's hands trembled as she said, "They thought time would bury it." Time almost did. Not this time. I needed legal cover. Daniel, the family lawyer, surprised me. He'd been loyal to the Reynolds name, but I'd seen him hesitate before when Margaret made impossible demands. I met him in his downtown office, the city lights reflecting on his glasses. I placed the copies of the drafts, the receipts, and Helen's statements on his desk. He read, then lowered his head. "If this is true," he said quietly, "reopening the estate could be messy. They will sue, they will attack reputations. Are you ready for that?" I looked at him and answered, "I am ready to be exposed if it means the truth comes out." We built the plan like a careful recipe. First, authenticate. Daniel contacted a trusted court archivist and a private investigator to confirm dates, signatures, and financial transfers. Second, corroborate. Helen and Sophie gathered witnesses, old staff, a distant cousin, the florist who once delivered unnoticed invoices. Third, publish a controlled reveal, an investigative journalist Sophie trusted, one who cared about truth more than clicks. Every step felt dangerous. They could freeze the accounts, intimidate witnesses, ruin my mother for speaking up. I knew they would try to humiliate me further, to paint me as the bitter granddaughter trying to claw back what wasn't hers. That fear sat in my chest like a stone. But it sat beside something quieter and larger. I wasn't fighting for a check. I was fighting so a name wouldn't be stolen again. We rehearsed our statements until each word felt true and sharp. Daniel warned me about legal pushback. Helen warned me about emotional fallout. Sophie warned me about how small-town gossip can destroy innocent people. I listened to them all and folded each warning into the plan like a safety net. On the last night before we moved, I placed copies of every document into sealed envelopes, one for the journalist, one for the court, one for public release if anyone tried to bury it. I sat at the kitchen table, Nora's photo and Grandpa's letters spread like a map to the ruin they had carefully built. I pressed my palm to the paper and whispered, "This will expose them. This will force respect where they denied it." My hands didn't shake anymore. I felt steady, as if I'd been carved out of something harder. Then I stood, took the envelopes, and walked to the front door. The night outside was quiet, almost conspiratorial. I paused on the threshold, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Would I really go through with it? The night of the confrontation arrived cloaked in polite smiles and polished silver. The Reynolds family had gathered once again, this time, for a private dinner to celebrate Ethan's leadership. It was supposed to be a quiet, elegant evening at the mansion. The same mansion where I'd once been told I didn't belong. Only this time, I came prepared. I'd worn black, simple, sharp, deliberate. The house looked just as I remembered, chandeliers glowing, laughter echoing off walls that had heard too many lies. Grandma sat at the head of the table, Ethan on her right, basking in attention as relatives toasted his achievements. I stood at the doorway for a few moments before walking in. Conversations froze. Silverware stopped clinking. Ethan blinked. "Emma," he said, forcing a smile. "You weren't invited." I smiled faintly. "I know. But I came anyway." Grandma's voice hardened. "This isn't the time, Emma. We've had enough drama from you." "Oh, I agree," I said softly. "Tonight isn't about drama. It's about truth." The tension thickened. Everyone watched as I placed a thick envelope on the dining table, one marked with the Reynolds crest. "What's that supposed to be?" Ethan asked, irritation creeping into his tone. I took a slow breath. "It's Grandpa's original will, the one you both buried." A gasp rippled across the table. Grandma's fork clattered against her plate. Ethan laughed, trying to sound amused. "That's impossible. The official will was executed legally." I met his eyes. "No, the revised will was executed, the one you helped rewrite after Grandpa was too weak to speak. The original was written a month earlier, and it names me as joint heir." For a second, silence fell, that heavy kind of silence that swallows air. Grandma's voice trembled, sharp but brittle. "You don't know what you're talking about." I slid the evidence across the table, notarized copies, dated medical records, even Grandpa's handwritten note. Emma stood by me when no one else did. She deserves what she's earned. Helen stepped out from the hallway then, her frail figure steady as she placed her hand on my shoulder. "I was there the night he wrote it," she said softly. "I watched Ethan make the call to the lawyer who changed everything after Mr. Reynolds passed." Ethan's mask cracked. "You're lying," he snapped. "You're both lying." "No," came another voice, Daniel's. He entered quietly from the other side of the room, a briefcase in hand. "The documents have been verified. A court hearing has been set for tomorrow morning. Everything you see here will be entered into the record." The room erupted into chaos. Grandma shouted, Ethan cursed, aunts and uncles whispered. But I stood still, my voice cutting through it all. "You erased me to protect your reputation. You made me invisible in my own family. But what's built on lies always collapses under truth." Ethan lunged for the papers, but Daniel blocked him. Grandma's eyes filled with fury and something else, fear. "You'll ruin this family, Emma," she screamed. I looked her straight in the eye. You already did. The room went quiet again. All that could be heard was the faint ticking of the antique clock, the same one that had witnessed years of deceit. Then, as if on cue, Sophie's phone buzzed. She glanced at me and nodded. It's done, she whispered. Within minutes, the truth went public. The journalist had released the full story, the hidden will, the falsified signatures, the fraud that Ethan and Grandma had tried to bury. Phones began ringing around the table as the news spread across the city. The mighty Reynolds name, the one they had used to crush me, was now exposed for corruption and manipulation. Grandma sank into her chair, pale and trembling. Ethan's face twisted in disbelief as he read the breaking headlines. You destroyed everything, he spat. I stepped closer, calm, almost serene. No. I just reminded the world what you really are. For the first time, no one defended them. No one clapped. No one laughed. They sat in stunned silence as the empire they'd built on greed began to crumble, and I stood in the ruins, unbroken. As I turned to leave, I paused at the door and looked back once more. You erased me from your will, I said quietly. Now the world has erased your reputation. And with that, I walked out, my heels echoing down the marble hallway, leaving behind the sound of a legacy collapsing under its own lies. The next morning, the Reynolds mansion was silent. For the first time in my life, there was no laughter, no chatter, no illusion of perfection. The air outside felt lighter, freer, as if even the walls had finally exhaled after years of keeping secrets. I stood by the old iron gate, watching the dawn paint the sky gold. The headlines had already spread through the town: Reynolds family scandal, will fraud exposed. Their spotless reputation had fallen overnight. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt, still, peaceful, in a way I hadn't known since childhood. Inside the mansion, I could see the servants packing boxes. Grandma hadn't come downstairs. Ethan was locked in his room, trying to salvage whatever scraps of power he had left. For years, they made me feel like an outsider, but now, I didn't need entry. The truth had already walked through the door. When Helen stepped outside to meet me, she looked weary but proud. You did it, she said softly. He'd be proud, Emma. Your grandfather, he always believed you had the strength. I smiled faintly. I didn't do it for revenge, Helen. I did it because I couldn't let their lies live longer than his truth. She nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. Sometimes justice looks like destruction. But maybe that's how new things grow. Later that day, I visited Grandpa's grave for the first time since everything happened. I knelt beside the stone, tracing his name with my fingers. They tried to erase me, Grandpa, I whispered. But they ended up erasing themselves. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment, I could almost hear his voice again, calm, warm, reassuring. Respect isn't given by blood, Emma. It's earned by truth. As I stood, I saw Sophie waiting by the car. She waved, smiling softly. So, what now? She asked as I approached. I took one last look at the estate, the symbol of everything I once craved. The stone walls, the iron gates, the grandeur that had meant so much to them and so little to me now. Now, I said quietly, I start over. Without their approval. Without their name. We drove away, the mansion fading in the rearview mirror like a photograph left too long in the sun, all brightness drained, all illusions gone. In the following weeks, the investigation deepened. Ethan tried to deny everything, but evidence spoke louder. Grandma resigned from the board of the family foundation, citing health reasons. Reporters camped outside, hungry for a comment I never gave. Because I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already won, not through revenge, but through exposure. Through truth. One afternoon, I walked past a group of locals reading the news. One woman whispered, "Poor girl, imagine being treated like that by your own family." Another replied, "She's stronger than all of them. At least she has her dignity." And that word, dignity, stayed with me. That was the one thing they could never take away. Before all this, I used to believe family defined who you were. Now, I know better. Blood may connect people, but it's truth and respect that bind them. I lost a family that never valued me and found a self that finally did. As I closed my journal that night, I wrote one final line beneath all my notes, one that summed up everything I'd learned. Revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about rebuilding the part of yourself they tried to break. And with that, I turned off the light, no longer broken, no longer waiting to be seen. Because for the first time, I respected myself enough to walk away, and that was the real victory.